Are you interested?
If we need to. And in fact, it'd be a good idea. Light. Point lights are like the spotlight. But they don't have a cone, they emit light in all directions. So I'll just come around here and G to grab and pull it out the front there slightly, and you can see the effect that's having. I obviously want to change the colour of this point light to red to match the eyes, and then it looks like the eyes, if I press full stop on lamp.
はじめまして大好きな音楽へずっと考えてたことどうか聞いてほしくって伝えたいことがちょっと照れくさいけれどずっと思っていたことこんなお手紙に込めてどんな時もあなたの言葉声を聞いているだけで力が湧いてくるんだねえ笑ってたいよどんな時もでも辛いくらい痛い日もあるけどねあなたに触れるだけで気づ しもあなたに出会えてなかったらなんて思うだけで怖いほど大好きなんだ受け取ってどうか私の想いをさあ笑って泣いてそんな毎日を歩いてくんだいつもいつまでも辛いくらい痛いこともたくさんあるけどこの世界はいつでもどこでも音楽で溢れてる目の前のことも将来のことも不安になってどうしたらいいのわかんなくって迷うこともあるけど
A numpad are emitting light. Let's copy that across. Shift D to duplicate, Shift D, and then the X axis. So Shift D, then X, and move it across, and now I have two emissions from there. And you can change the wattage as you like. So now we've got all our lights, I think it would be a good idea to group them all together so we can hide them if we need to. And in fact, it'd be a good idea to start organising our scene a bit because it's looking a bit confusing. So let's click on all our lights and press M to move to collection. So M is move to collection. I'm going to create a new collection there and call these lights and press OK. Now in my outliner, if I bring this down a bit so we can see it, there's my outliner, and I scroll up, you can see my lights. All my lights there are in a lighting collection, and I can minimize this. I can hide the lights, and you can see them hidden from the viewport, and therefore they don't have an effect. And then I've got this render tab just here, so that means they won't be rendered. If you don't see that render tab, this little camera, you've got the filters up here. So I've got selection tab just here, so that you can see my lights. All my lights there are in a lighting collection. And I can minimize this. I can hide the lights, and you can see them hidden from the viewport, and therefore they don't have an effect. And then I've got this render tab just here, so that means they won't be rendered. If you don't see that render tab, this little camera, you've got the filters up here. So I've got selection, visible in viewport, and rendered turned on. So you might have to click on that camera. That way I can see what's going to be rendered or not by clicking that, and what's in my viewport or not by clicking that, and you can see the effects down here. So I'm going to do that for each of my objects. I'm going to put the monster into a collection, the man into a collection, and the street with the street lamp into a collection. So the monster, so I'll hide my lights for the moment, click on my monster and select two eyes, M to move to collection, new collection, monster. press OK. And there's my monster with my objects inside. I'll hide that. I'll do the street next, so the lamp and the pavement and the street. M to move to collection, new collection, street. And press OK. And then I'll hide that. And then just the man, I can box select all of him. M to move to collection, new collection, man. And press OK. Now I can bring these all back. And it's much easier to organize my scene. So the last thing we want to do is the fog, and then think about our render settings. So in the world output once again, which is down the bottom here, and remember you have to click on world over here, I can add some volume to it. So if I press Shift A to add, shader, principled volume. I can then bring this across over here. I can then add that to the... Okay. Now I can bring these all back. And it's much easier to organize my scene. So the last thing we want to do is the fog, and then think about our render settings. So in the world output once again, which is down the bottom here, and remember you have to click on world over here, I can add some volume to it. So if I press Shift A to add, shader, principled volume. I can then bring this across over here. I can then add that to the volume, and you see the results there. Now it's very dense, so we can't see anything. So I'm going to change the density to 0.01, see what that looks like. And you can see now we've got a bit of volume. If for any reason you don't see the volume, shader, principled volume. I can then bring this across over here. I can then add that to the volume, and you see the results there. Now it's very dense, so we can't see anything. So I can then add that to the volume, and you see the results there. Now it's very dense, so we can't see anything. So I'm going to change the density to 0.01, see what that looks like. And you can see now we've got a bit of volume. If for any reason you don't see the volume, you'll need to make sure that volumetrics is ticked in your render settings, but I will go through that shortly. At this point I can bring the strength of my background down a bit more, so there's nothing coming from my background now, so this is just the background. Fog, which is white, but it's being affected by the sun lamp, so we can start to see some of these emissions. And at this point you'll want to go in and start clicking on your lights, changing the power of your lights. So let's change this to 2000 and just see what that looks like. And we can see more effect from it now. And with more density you may need more emission from the lights. And we're starting to get close to the initial scene. Now it's worth noting that I'm just plugging this straight into the world, which gives everything that volume. I'm just going to disconnect that for now, and I'm going to add a big cube in the middle, so Shift A to add cube, and I'll just resize that over everything. I'll go to top view to make it easier, 7 on my numpad, scale in the Y, scale in the X, and we're roughly there. Now if I go to object shading over here, add a new, disconnect the principled VSDF, and Shift A, shader, principled volume, and plug that into the volume of this material, you can see the effects that it's having. Bring that density down to 0.1 again. And now that's just affected this area, which kind of helps slightly because we've got this black background and we can kind of see more what's going on in our little scene. So you can create areas of fog with a big cube like this if you want to. In this case, because the whole scene is being lit up with fog, it doesn't make too much difference. What I'm going to do is press M to move this to a new collection and type in fog, so I have the option if I want to use that fog or not. But I'm going to stop it being rendered and take it out of our viewport so it doesn't get distracting. Go back to our world settings and plug the volume back in.
You're trying to build.
And you can really see the difference that it makes. I'll just use the world one for now because I think that's a little bit simpler to understand, but you are able to use objects as fog volumes. And remember to change your object tab here to see them. So I've got a density of 0.1 on this one, but my world tab has a density of 0.01, and I'm kind of liking the effect here, so I might put the density up. But let's hide that fog from the viewport for now and use the fog in the world. So I can just push that up. So 0.05 maybe, somewhere around there. 0.03, and just play with it a bit until you get something you like. And also you want to be playing with your lights, particularly the sun lamp up here, the sun just there, and we can change the colour of this, and that will affect the colour of our fog. So lastly, let's take a quick look at render settings. I do have a separate video on this, which I'll link in the description, but just very briefly, I'll move in just a touch to our scene. Ambient occlusion is useful. It creates shadows where objects touch each other, so you can see in there if I turn it off and on. It's not easy to see with the fog turned on. I'll just turn that off for the moment, so I'll just disconnect it from the world, and ambient occlusion on and off. Again, with this sort of lighting, it's not making a huge amount of difference, but usually you have to turn the distance up quite a lot. Let's put the volume back in. Bloom is something that you'll probably want to use in this case, so giving a bit of brightness to the eyes and the emissions. You have your threshold, which is how much will be bloomed. So the brightness of the objects, they have to be very bright in order to be hit by the bloom or affected by the bloom. This way they don't have to be very bright and they're affected by the bloom. So you can see the fog now is even being affected by the bloom and everything. So somewhere around there where we've got the lamp, or the two lamps, having some bloom. The other thing you'll probably want to turn on is screen space reflections. You can see that that created a reflection on my street. So I'll turn that off and on and you can see the effects there. The other thing you might want to play with is the volumetrics. I've got mine set to 4 pixels. The lower the pixels, the slower the render time, but the better the result. And volumetric lighting and volumetric shadows. You can see what they do for yourself. Volumetric lighting is turned on by default, but volumetric shadows should create shadows in your volumes. If I turn the density up slightly, you can start to see those shadows coming across. Like I've said, I'll go through this in more detail if you want to find out more in the tutorial in the description. The last thing for us to do is to set up our camera. So our camera is currently here, and if we look through the camera, it's just pointing at the monster's bum. And to look through the camera, we press 0 on our numpad. If I press N now, I can go to view over here, a little bit tricky to see, so I'll pull out this for now, and lock camera to view. If you tick that, you can move your camera around like it's your viewport. Now I do have a separate video for camera turnarounds, and I'll put that in the description. And you'll be able to rotate your camera around your objects. But for now, let's see what this is going to look like. So if I press F12, or I can go to render up the top here and render image, we can see what that's going to look like. And that's our current scene. And you can save your image at the top left under image, and your final scene should look very similar to this just here. So you might want to tweak a few settings, set up your camera in an interesting position, and then render. And a great idea is to join the Discord server and show off your work there, or put a comment below with your results. So that brings us to the end of this series. If you have any thoughts